Welcome to DMs Discuss.
I'm Mike.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Scott.
Welcome to DMs Discuss, where this week DMs are going to discuss our favorite monsters. This is going to be a series that we're entitling the Dungeon Master Monster Manual, where we're going to talk about some of our favorite creatures and how we use them in our campaigns. I'm going to kick things off this week talking about my favorite low-level things to run. I love running goblin-based adventures, so they're my favorite thing in the world. Goblins and goblin bosses in particular. I run goblins so I can run goblin bosses. Goblins themselves, not a ton of stuff to them. They have their kind of basic attack. They have a ranged attack with short bow, which is nice if you're trying to get into kind of range combat with your party. But for the most part, they can disengage as a bonus action, which is nice, but they're just low-level fodder. To me, goblins are really fun to run because of goblin bosses. Goblin bosses are one of the favorite things as written I've ever had show up in my games as a DM. And essentially, as a reaction, goblin bosses can redirect an attack. So if a creature that the goblin boss can see targets it with an attack, the goblin can pick another goblin that's within 5 feet of itself and swap places so the chosen goblin gets hit instead. It's basically using its smaller goblin friends as shields. And it's the funniest thing in the world to me. So I think that what I've done in my games is use kind of the mentality that Matt Colville put forth in his Action-Oriented Monsters video, which we'll plug in the show notes, and just one up what goblin bosses do. So by default, they just have that redirect attack, which is fantastic. They have their scimitar attack and they have javelins, so they can hit you at range too. But for the most part, they're just no, and they move out of the way and let you get hit, or let another goblin get hit in their place. But what I usually do is add some other reactions to them. So on top of the redirect attack, I have added a thing called "You Die When I Say So," which is when a goblin within 30 feet of the goblin boss is reduced to 0 points. The boss can spend his reaction to instead restore that goblin to 1 hit point. So if you see somebody get hit and that person falls down, they just be no, you die when I tell you to die. Get up. And they are back up at 1 HP. So they're not game breaking, but they have another chance to attack, or they will draw another attack from the party. So it's just crazily adding to the action economy. Also added legendary actions that you use at certain points for goblin bosses. So what I've added is moving all goblins within 30 feet. They can either move or attack. So it's what I've called "What Are You Waiting For?" If they're already against somebody, they can attack. If they aren't, they can move up to 30 feet when the legendary action happens. All goblins that are within 30 feet of the boss.
Yeah, so if the term legendary action is new to you, what a legendary action is certain creatures who are quote-unquote legendary, or have some, they're not just some run-of-the-mill goblin, or they're not some run-of-the-mill wolf. These creatures might have legendary actions, and the video Mike plugged is fantastic. You should definitely watch it. But what legendary actions are is every round that creature will gain a certain number of legendary actions, sometimes 1, sometimes 3. And at the end of any player's turn, that creature can use one of its legendary actions. So let's say you have 3 legendary actions, and one of them says 1 action to cast a spell, 1 action, as Mike said, to move other creatures. At the end of one of your player's turn, this boss can just decide to, I'm gonna guiding bolt you. And then that is not its turn. It is just something it's doing at the end of other players' turns. And that can really add some nice dynamicness to your big creatures.
Yeah, for sure. And my thing with goblin bosses in particular, and the reason I liked Matt Colville's video about this, was he doesn't just add legendary actions, he also adds alternate reactions and bonus actions to creatures so that you can change up and make the combat a little bit more dynamic. But also, especially in low-level campaigns, I never like fudging dice, and I don't like I just never fudge dice, so I don't want to do that. But if a thing is too easy, or if a thing is too hard, you can balance it using these abilities. Like for instance, the goblin boss bonus action is Get In Here, where the boss yells over his shoulder and just another goblin comes running out of whatever building is nearest. to join the fray. Like it's just an ability to use the actions of a boss or these like legendary action style things to balance low level encounters.
Yeah, I like that. And we might have an episode on this entire thing, like action oriented creatures similar to that video. Um, but also in terms of these creatures, I'm just going to add a little tidbit here, which is maybe a bit of a tangent, but we'll come back to creatures in a second, which is layer actions. These bosses are going to set up their environments. These are not stupid creatures. These are creatures that are going to use their environment to their advantage too. So one of their reactions could be, I'm going to pull this string and a bunch of boulders are going to fall on you because I set that trap up.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are choosing to engage a boss in their home environment, you're gonna be encountering things that they've set up because there's no reason they wouldn't already have things prepared for you.
Yeah, and sorry for that. I just think that's super important when it comes to like we're talking about goblin bosses and their actions and making things harder. Like, yeah, they're gonna set up their environment so that they're safe and protected, right?
Absolutely, yeah, no, and no worries about interrupting. That's all I really have to say about goblins and goblin bosses. I just love low level fodder with like a like mafia boss style, like no, using you as a human shield or get in here, you die when I tell you to die, like that kind of stuff is um, some of my favorite stuff in low level D&D.
Yeah, well, I think what Scott was saying is a pretty good segue to what you're saying about lair actions. Is one of my favorite monsters to use is kobolds, because I used to also think of them as super low level fodder, uh, but then Volos came out, added a whole bunch of new things and how to play them, and as you're saying, Scott, I 100% make it so that you find a kobold outside, it probably runs away, it's incredibly easy to kill. You go inside one of their warrens, be it they live in a sewer or tunnels they dug out in their own, and they are constantly like hiding in walls, dropping rocks on top of you. And essentially, you can play these guys as just sneaky cowards who use numbers and sticky situations to win against even higher level players. I ran a kobold den against players who I think were level 16, and they had a rough go of it. I think one of the fun parts is that they have pack tactics. So in numbers, even if players have decently high armor class, everyone having advantage most of the time, they're at least going to crit. It's not an average damage, but it adds up slowly. And also, they added one of my favorite additions to the Kobold roster, is the Kobold Inventor, which is a hilarious enemy to use against your players. Because essentially, they're just a kobold with a bag full of stuff that they can just throw at people. So they have an acid flask, they have alchemist fire, they have a basket of centipedes, they have a scorpion on a stick that just poke you with and it stings you. One of my favorite things, they have a skunk in a cage, and they just let loose a skunk, and it just kind of wanders around aimlessly. And if it ends up near a player who fails a con save, they end up like spending their turn retching and reeling from the stench of it. And I just
That's
love the
amazing.
idea that like their most brilliant inventor just has pots of bugs and animals and stuff that are just hucking at the players.
That's like very, very on brand for kobolds.
Yeah, I really like that. So I see your goblins and kobolds, and I will raise you wolves. Um, wolves is a very quintessential D&D monster. I think it's a very quintessential adventure monster. I mean, I think of video games and stuff, and like World of Warcraft. You're in the forest, you're gonna see wolves, and they are a pack. And Witcher, you're gonna see a pack of wolves. I think wolves are kind of a quintessential quote unquote monster. They can be found in various environments, like the desert. There could be wolves in the forest. There could be wolves in the jungle. You can basically flavor these any way you want. Um, you know, as per our last episode, you could just add the word space in front of it, and now you're fighting space wolves. But I really like wolves as a creature. They have a 13 AC, which is generally low for a party. I mean, D20 plus 4, you're probably going to hit these things fairly often. 40-foot movement speed, 11 hit points. They generally only take a few hits to be downed. But a few things make them fun low level monsters. And one of those is that they have keen hearing and smell. So the wolf has advantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on hearing or smell. You're trying to sneak up on a pack of wolves. Yeah, they're going to hear you. You're trying to sneak around a pack of wolves. Yeah, they're going to hear you or smell you. On top of that, from a flavor perspective, wolves are like a very quintessential hunter. They're fierce. They are loyal. They travel in packs. You do have the alpha wolf, which gives you, similar to Mike, your goblin and goblin bosses. You do have a precedence for wolves, and wolf boss. Here's the alpha leader, right? Alpha male, alpha female, whatever. Here are your alpha leaders, or alpha both, or alpha anything. They are very formidable low level creatures. And one of the reasons for that is similar to your kobolds, Chris. Wolves have pack tactics. So, these wolves are going to surround a single player. They are going to take their attacks at advantage. They are going to hit for 2d4 plus 4, which at levels 2 and 3, max 10 damage, that can absolutely down a player. And with pack tactics, like Chris said, you're rolling at advantage. You're increasing your chance to crit to 10%, right? So I think it's 10%. I think that's how the math works out, but 5% on each attack. And because of that, at low levels, between levels 1 and 5, a pack of wolves is definitely a formidable opponent. I really like wolves for that reason. And yeah, for that reason, that's why wolves is kind of up there on one of my favorite monsters.
Yeah, they are definitely fun, and especially the fact you can kind of scale them up and put them anywhere is super useful. But outside of starting monsters, like just going to just things I like throwing at players that are fun and hilarious, I'm going to talk about the Bodak, which is a undead that doesn't see as much use as classic zombies and skeletons, but it is a lot of fun for me as a DM. Generally, it's a CR6, decent amount of health, 15 armor class, not crazy high. It's resistant to a lot of stuff, non-magical physical damage, and cold and fire. It's immune to lightning and poison. The real fun part about it is it has something called Death Gaze. And the way this works is if you make eye contact with a Bodak, it can just try to kill you instantly. It's a 13 con save. If you can see it and you fail the saving throw by more than 5, you're reduced to 0 hit points immediately, unless you're immune to Frighten. Otherwise, it's 3d10 psychic damage. And it seems a little strong, but the other part of it is that unless you're surprised, you can avert your eyes to avoid having to do the saving throw. But you have to take disadvantage in all your attack rolls against the Bodak. And if you look at it during your turn, you then have to make the saving throw. So it's a really fun thing that once you put this thing in a room with players, it's like, what spells do I have to actually target it with and see the creature versus am I just gonna swing at this thing at disadvantage trying not to look at it? And also you can just be a little bit cheap with this and hide it inside a coffin or behind a door. Just someone opens it and just goes boo, and then you're dead.
Can I just say this thing looks really fucking cool? It's just I'm gonna link it in the show notes. We should link the picture of a Bodak on Forgotten Realms here. But yeah, it's just this it's got a really interesting face. It's a super cool creature.
Yeah. Outside of its Death Gaze, it does have, it's got an AoE 30-foot damage aura it can turn on and off that doesn't harm other undeads. And it just has, a gaze attack that does psychic damage in a fist. But honestly, the main reason I like using these is it's really fun having, especially if you put it as kind of a mini boss character amongst other undead, is having this thing that's kind of lurking around, dealing a passive damage aura, and if anyone looks at it, it's just maybe you're gonna die. I feel like it serves as just such a classic boogeyman style monster.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Speaking of boogeyman style monsters, if you're done with Bodak, I think my next favorite creature to use wasn't a favorite of mine before I started running Stroud for you all, but night hags have become one of my favorite thing in the world to run. They are also like the kind of quintessential like boogeyman style character. They have the ability to move themselves uh, between planes, which is super useful for being able to hop between the material and the ethereal plane. It becomes less useful once your party gets a robe of eyes, but I mean, still fun even when that is the case, because they can just sit in the ethereal and laugh at you without being able to be touched until you get some sort of means to be able to get there to get them. But yeah, they are one of my favorite thing to run because they have the ability to be that like fade in and out constant enemy where they can just take pot shots at you with no warning and then get away really easily because they can either go ethereal themselves or they can cast plane shift on themselves if they're within their coven. So that becomes really great. But the reason I love using them in long running campaigns is because of something Chris mentioned in the last episode, which is the nightmare haunting, which is one of their features. So once a day, while the night hag is on the ethereal plane, they can magically touch a sleeping humanoid that is on the material plane. So when they do this, the contacted creature has dreadful visions, and they last for at least an hour. The target gains no benefit from a rest, which means that it would take a point of exhaustion for not getting a long rest, and its hit point maximum is reduced by a d10, and that can only be removed with a greater resto, which night hags are only CR7 ish. So like the chances that the first time that your party encounters a night hag, they have the ability to actually remove this thing is not super high.
As someone who is down like 35 max health, I think that's a terrible feature.
But yeah, it becomes super useful, and they become this like terrifying, ever-present thing that you can use to just terrorize your party. And they don't have to show up like a few sessions in a row. They could just be lurking in the background, and as soon as the party thinks that they are safe, you can pounce. And also, there's nothing saying that your party members are going to discuss whether or not they've been having fitful nightmares and are waking up exhausted. So you can spread the nightmares around, and every night you can go to different party members and just do that kind of stuff depending on whether or not they're going to talk about it. So night hags have become one of my favorite thing to use, especially like in full covens, because when they are within a coven, they gain access to a bunch of other fun spells like Phantasmal Killer. Eye Bite is a very fun one they have access to. And their CC is not super high, but it is good against like low to mid range parties. They're a good like middle of the campaign kind of big bad.
And let's go to the opposite side of the spectrum. This is actually a lawful good celestial creature. However, if I change that lawful good to lawful evil, and this creature has now been put under the service of an evil god or a demon, this creature becomes one of my... Oh, wait, was this supposed to be Chris?
No, Chris
did Bodak, right? Fuck. Okay. And yeah, maybe in the opposite vein, let's talk about a medium celestial lawful good creatures that is one of my favorites. If you take out the word good and you put these creatures under the service of a demon or demon lord or evil deity and make them lawful evil, the Battle Force Angel becomes one of my favorite monsters. They are beefy. They got a good 66 average hit points, so 12d8 plus 12. They have a fairly high armor class at 18, so they are going to be hard to hit for lower level party members. They have a 90-foot fly speed. Your rogue is doing a ton of melee damage. Yeah, I'm just going to fly up 60 feet. Cool. Have fun from the ground. They have pretty high saving throws in wisdom and charisma, +6 and +7. And whiz saving throws are very, very common way to shut a creature down. So having a high wisdom saving throw definitely makes these things more formidable. They have resistance to fire and radiant damage, two very, very common damage types. They're immune to charm, exhaustion, and frightened, very common conditions. They have dark vision, they have true sight, they have pretty high passive perception. And they have a few traits and actions that make them even beefier and even harder to deal with. Let's look at traits first. Magic resistance. So on top of these condition immunities and damage resistances, this creature has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. You want to try and put me to sleep? Yeah, I'm rolling 2d20s. You want to try and do one of the things that I'm not immune to? Yeah, I'm rolling 2d20s and taking the higher. Magic resistance just gives them a way to be beefier to spells. The other trait that makes them pretty formidable is flyby. So this angel does not provoke opportunity attacks. They can use their fly speed, fly 30 feet to a creature, run their sword along their cheeks, and fly away without incurring opportunity attacks. I find that sometimes when running a monster, the whole notion of I want to move away from this PC who's going to absolutely decimate me next turn is always a risk because of the opportunity attack. Not with Battle Force Angels. You are not taking opportunity attacks. Their actions are fairly standard. They have a multi-attack, and that's a +6 to hit. That can deal, D8 +3, so it's pretty in line with what your party's going to be doing. However, if the target is within 5 feet of any of the angel's allies, the target takes an extra d4 radiant damage. So, two of these angels coming in and beating up on somebody gives you a little bit more beefy damage. But, okay, what do you guys think so far? Pretty dope-ass monster, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think anything that has that, the ability to disengage is always, as you said, very important. Either through flyby or bonus action disengage. Because as you said, opportunity attacks can really change the dynamics of a fight, especially if someone is Sentinel. Someone always says Sentinel.
Yeah, so what did you... Sentinel is an issue, but flyby in itself is fantastic. What is one of the best low-level cleric spells in your opinion?
Create water.
Bless, maybe?
Bless? Okay, I think Bless as well. Battle Force Angels have a built-in Bless. The Battle Force Angels multi-attack. The angel makes 2 melee attacks and then uses Battlefield Inspiration. Battlefield Inspiration. The angel chooses up to 3 creatures it can see within 30 feet of it. Until the end of the angel's next turn, each target can add a d4 to its attack and saving throws. When you have multiple angels spread across a battlefield that are all inspiring each other, they are doing d20 +6 +d4 to hit. They're gonna fuck shit up. They're pretty formidable in packs. These things can be a force to be reckoned with. Yes, they are lawful good, but if you are running a good campaign, throw some corruption elements in there, change that good to evil, and these things become a really, really fun monster to run.
Yeah, those sound kind of terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah, that's actually what you guys were facing when you fought that Shadow Dragon. The things it was resurrecting. There were only a few of them, but they did do a little bit of work. But and even describing the battlefield inspiration, this angel takes a few swings at you and then yells out, and you see the other angels kind of bolster and take up their weapons. There's some really fun flavor stuff for that. So yeah.
Cool. And moving back to the actual evil creatures away from the lawful good angels, one of the favorite things that I've found from the Strahd campaign has been their take on zombies. Zombies for me have been a fun kind of horror trope creature in the past, but they're not super fun to run because they just kind of shamble around and their chance to hit's not very high. Even if they do hit, they don't have a lot of hit points, so they die pretty quickly. You have to have a horde of them for it to be any way effective. But with Strahd zombies, the thing that I found that was really cool was that they could be broken into pieces by attacks, and they shared a hit point pool, but could still be a terrifying thing. So if you hit a Strahd zombie and you do more than I think 5 bludgeoning or slashing damage to it, I roll a d20 as a DM, and then if it's a 17 to 20, the head rolls off. But that doesn't mean it's dead. If you decapitate a creature in D&D 99% of the time, that means the creature's dead. So when the first time one of your players chops the head off a Strahd zombie with its first attack and then turns around and the head rears up and bites it in the ankle right afterwards, you get some crazy reactions. So I think that's one of my favorite things. On the D20 you roll when they take damage, they can either lose a leg, which has implications, lose an arm, which has implications, or be decapitated. If they're reduced to 0 hit points, all parts of them die. But until then, severed parts act on their own turn. So arms and legs can both make claw attacks, and the head can make bite attacks. They have half the movement speed of the regular creature, but they can still move around, and like the head can roll around and bite people, which is insane and terrifying for your players the first time you run into these kind of creatures. So I think those are like my favorite, like another low-ish level, but one that has a little bit more hit points, and if you put enough of them in a room, can really kind of terrify a mid to high level party.
Yeah, I think it's nice to see them be brought back to more of like a scary zombie that, you know, is undead. It falls apart. It keeps going. It really adds to like the zombie fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. That was like my favorite thing about them is that you don't just like chop off an arm and then they're dead, or you don't just chop off their head and then they're dead. Like they need to be fully reduced to 0 hit points, or you're going to get attacked by a dismembered arm or bitten by just a head rolling around on the ground in your space.
Yeah, and I think that mechanic is really cool, and it's something that you can apply to your own monsters too, right? In terms of having, like, the way I see that is you're not fighting a zombie, you are fighting a culmination of monsters. One being the head, one being the claws, and yeah, they share the hit point pool. But I think like with a boss fight too, you can do something like that where, yeah, you take off this guy's arm and it becomes something else. Or I think it's a really cool mechanic.
Yeah, and it modifies the original monster. So like the thing with these is they have a really low armor class. They're really easy to hit, but they're only like CR1. So you put a bunch of these in a room and they actually get 3 attacks by default. But if they lose an arm, then they lose an attack. But that arm can make an attack on its turn. So the main creature still gets 3 attacks essentially every turn. 1 bite and 2 claws. So the main body of the creature, whoever it's up against, will lose the ability to make certain attacks, but those attacks just kind of get transferred off to these individual pieces, which is a really fun way to run it.
Yeah, it's definitely a very cool monster. Speaking of other undeads that came out, recently I was playing around with some stuff in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I ran a little one-shot to try out some of the new things, and I found a monster that quickly became a favorite. And it's the Dualahan. It is the classic headless horseman, and it has so many fun things. I think it would be a good fit for like, it could be the boss of a shorter like horror themed campaign. So it's a CR10, and it just has so many different things it can do. So it has some legendary resistances, stuff like that. 2 legendary resistances. Doesn't need to eat. Doesn't need to sleep, and it runs around. It has a axe, which does decent amount of damage. But the fun part is, if it gets a critical hit against someone with this axe, that creature has to make a 15 con save, or it cuts off its head and dies. And then it has like a ranged fiery skull attack, just, to keep people at a distance. And then it has its legendary actions, which are also really neat. So it can make an attack, which for a single action, it can use its Frightful Presence, which just 15 whiz save, or everyone's afraid of it, until the end of its next turn. Or it has Headhunt, which is really fun. It's 3 actions, but it can move up to its entire speed without provoking opportunity attacks, and then makes a battle axe attack with advantage. And if it's not a critical hit, it deals an extra 68 necrotic damage. So overall, it's a pretty fun creature. You can treat it as the classic, headless horseman that haunts the characters and stuff. Give him a mount to really finish it off, to up his movement speed even more.
Put him on a nightmare.
Exactly, on a nightmare, even better. But the real fun part, I think, makes him potential to be like a good boss character for people like up to level 10, is he has something called Headless Summoning, which recharges on a short or long rest. And this is where it's fun, is that if you reduce him to 0 hit points, it does not die or fall unconscious. Instead, it heals for 97 hit points out of its 135 starting pool, and summons 3 Death's Heads, which are just floating severed heads. And they act immediately after it in its turn order, and then it gains mythic actions. So in addition to its regular legendary actions, it can now gain the option for coordinated assault, where it attacks and a Death's Head attacks at the same time. And it gains a Headless Whale, where it's just a big AoE psychic damage save, and it gains temporary hit points if someone fails it. So this boss is great because if you have this, you bring this in, your character's probably first time just bothers them, runs away, brings them pretty low. But then the ability, the fact that you could have it stick around for a fight and the characters think they killed it, and then to have it just stand back up again and summon more things and get stronger after that is just such a fun move to pull in a big fight.
Yeah, or when you have a player isolated on their own in a fucking funhouse of horrors against one of these things, and they walk up and dump a smite into it and kill it outright in the first turn, and then it puts itself back together and fucks them up.
Yeah, I think the Rising from the Dead is just such a cool mechanic, and to have it built in, especially as this like players are always never going to know if it's really dead, and the fact that like it can just do this and run away using its headhunt without opportunity attacks, and just if it can get off a short rest, it can die again.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, sounds pretty evil. Sounds quite dark. And when I think of Headless Horseman, I kind of think of that imagery, right? Like kind of dark, mysterious, just evil kind of figure, right? And another thing that invokes that that sort of feeling in me is the shadows and darkness, and for that reason, one of my favorite monsters is interesting because it's not necessarily a monster, but a template that you can apply to existing monsters, and it is the Shadow Dragon template. And you will find this in your monster manual as Dragon Shadow. And basically, you can apply this template to any dragon in the book. And I'll kind of read you some of the backstory on it. But shadow dragons are true dragons that were either born in the Shadowfell or transformed by years spent within its dismal confines. Now, I got around that by home brewing that they were being injected with some compound, but that's neither here nor there. Some shadow dragons embrace the Shadowfell for its bleak landscape and desolation. Others seek to return to the material plane, hungry to spread darkness and evil of the plane of shadow. Recast in Shadow. The transformation to a shadow dragon happens over a period of years, during which the dragon scales lose their luster and fade to a charcoal hue. And Chris and Mike, if you remember, I kind of worked that into the lore by having it cast off its red scales, and kind of have those black scales. They find sunlight abhorrent. This is not a dragon you're going to see flying around. This is going to be a dragon that you see in very deep and dark places. It actually is weaker in bright light. It does have sunlight sensitivity, but that kind of only plays into what the creature is. Young red shadow dragon. So looking at a young red dragon that has the shadow template applied to it. 18 armor class, which I don't necessarily think armor class is a reflection of how tough a monster is. Yes, in a way, but even these high CR and dangerous monsters, if they had a 50 armor class, no one would ever hit them, right? Or it'd be very rare. And that's not fun for players.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of AC and HP that really makes it
AC, HP, and traits, right?
Yeah.
So we have an 18 AC. We have on average 178 hit points, so 17 d10 plus 85. I think the one you guys fought had like 400 though, because you guys did a ton of damage. So I bumped it even before. 40-foot movement speed, 40-foot climb speed, 80-foot fly speed. Plus 6 strength, plus 5 con, plus 4 charisma. Those are the notables. Really high con and charisma saves. Plus 8 perception, plus 8 stealth. This thing is meant to live in the shadows. It is well adapted to that. It can hide very well, and it can see very well. resistant to necrotic damage, immune to fire. Fire being a very, very common high damage spell type or spell element. Immunity to fire is huge. And that's because it's a red shadow dragon. If you were running a green shadow dragon, you could have immunity to poison, I believe, right? Blind sight, 30 feet. Dark vision, 120 feet. Living shadow. While in dim light or darkness, the dragon has resistance to damage that isn't force, psychic, or radiant. So on top of the fire immunity and the necrotic resistance, if it is in dim light or darkness, which is how you should run this creature, and granted the party can cast daylight, and hey, good on them. But if the party does not have access to spells which produce that daylight, then this creature has resistance to all damage that isn't force, psychic, or radiant. While in dim light or darkness, the dragon can hide as a bonus action. So this means flying in, taking an attack at advantage, taking more attacks, flying out, taking an opportunity attack for very little damage, and then hiding as a bonus action, making it difficult to hit. It has a multi-attack, so 1 bite, 2 claws, which are at plus 10 to hit, and these can deal 20 to 30 damage each. And then, as all dragons, a breath. And when you apply the Shadow Dragon template to a dragon, that dragon loses its breath and gains a Shadow Breath. When I ran it for you guys, I actually modified that because the story was that this dragon was in the process of being corrupted. So you guys did get hit with a few fire breaths, which then turn into Shadow Breaths later on in the encounter. But Shadow Breath recharges on a 5 or 6. So every time the dragon's turn is up, it's going to roll a d6. And on a 5 or 6, its Shadow Breath comes back. The dragon exhales shadowy fire in a 30-foot cone. Each creature must make a DC 18 dex save. It's a pretty high dex save, DC 18.
I'm definitely not making that on most of my characters yet.
It's a very high dex save. Or take 16d6 necrotic damage on fail, half as much on success. A humanoid reduced to 0 hit points by this damage dies, and an undead shadow rises from its corpse and acts immediately after the dragon in the initiative count. The shadow is under the dragon's control. This is a TPK monster. This is a TPK boss. If you have one person get down to 0 by this Shadow Breath, it is only going to become harder for the party. The damage resistance, pretty formidable attacks, high AC, high dex save on this breath weapon. I added some legendary actions and legendary resistances to my young Red Shadow Dragon, who was a boss. He was the resurrection of, the culmination of a god of death and god of dragons. And this creature can pack a punch. And to be honest, I talked to you too about this. I don't think I did this thing justice. And this thing is a fucking killer. And I would love to run it again.
Yeah, that is like a great dragon end to a campaign. Like that's a campaign ending, like big bad. It's worthy of that for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. This is definitely worthy of being the focal point of your entire campaign. Most of my characters do tend to be a little edgelord. I do like, I'll be honest, I do like themes of darkness and horror and shadow, and I love the art. I love the imagery. I just love that stuff. So the Shadow Dragon template is one of my favorite.
Oh yeah, this was made for you for sure.
Yeah,
you play nothing but edgelords. It's great.
It's super dope. I mean, Ixie's not super edgelord, I don't think, but I'm trying to go a little bit different with her. But in terms of monsters, like, I know when we talked before, like, hey, Chris, D&D, like, that doesn't have to have dragons. And Chris is like, no, not everything has dragons, but this is my dragon. If I'm going to put a dragon somewhere, like, this is my dragon, a shadow dragon. It's so cool.
That's fair. And yeah, but before you end up facing a dragon, your party's going to have to go through lots of quests and meet lots of NPCs in your world. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. So join us back again then. As always, if you need to slide into a DMs, you can feel free to DM us on Insta, Twitter, or Facebook at DMs Discuss, or email us at dmsdiscuss@gmail.com.
And this has been Chris. And if you want to assign a Kobold Sentry to keep a watch over your favorite podcatcher app, it'll come running to alert you every time I release a new episode.
And this has been Scott. Have your party do some perception checks, take a good look around, and make sure there's no young red shadow dragon lurking in your corners before you set your head down for a long rest. Catch you all in the next episode.